Hands on the wall, now! The command cracked through the second-floor hallway like a whip, sharp enough to make the teenager in cuffs flinch and sharp enough to stop Lauren Whitfield in mid-note before she could turn her head. Sergeant Ryan McAllister grabbed her by the shoulder with a force that felt like intention rather than reflex, yanked her away from the vending machine, and slammed her face against the cinder-block wall. Her cheekbone struck first, her nose hit second, blood followed immediately. The impact rattled her teeth and left a ringing in her ears. McAllister pressed his forearm across her upper back, pinning her with the weight of a man who had lost control of his own anger. "I said hands on the wall," he barked, voice hoarse and trembling with last night's alcohol. "Don't make me put you down." Lauren kept both hands raised, palms open, steady even as blood dripped onto her blouse. She did not twist or resist. She did not shout. She spoke with calm authority that carried across the corridor. "Sergeant, remove your arm. I am Chief Designate Whitfield." McAllister leaned in harder, pressing her shoulder blade into the concrete. "Sure you are," he muttered with a bitter, dismissive laugh. "You people will say anything. 15 yards away." Senior Officer Malik Amir Carter froze for only half a second. His pulse spiked, his breath shortened, and his body remembered every instinct from the Marine Corps. One quick motion, and the small personal body camera clipped inside his jacket began recording. The red light blinked once. The hallway fell into a tight silence. In that silence, the future of the entire department shifted. Before we go deeper into this story, where are you watching from? And if stories like this matter to you, please subscribe to the channel and give me a like. It helps bring these real accounts to more people who need to hear them. Lauren had been in the courthouse less than 10 minutes. She had not yet put on the Navy uniform waiting in her office. She wore no badge, only a white blouse, slate gray slacks, and a visitor sticker curling at the edge. She was taking quiet notes on officer demeanor during prisoner transport, because she still believed a department's true culture always revealed itself in the small, unguarded moments. McAllister had entered the hallway already irritated, already loud, already pulling the 19-year-old detainee with a force that raised eyebrows among the clerks. The boy's wrists were red from the cuffs. His eyes were wide with the tired fear of someone too used to being handled without dignity. Lauren watched for a moment, preparing to introduce herself, to de-escalate what looked like unnecessary aggression. She did not expect the sergeant to treat her presence as a threat. She did not expect him to react like a man cornered by his own resentment. And she did not expect to feel warm blood spreading across her collar before she had spoken her first full sentence as Chief Designate, pinned against the wall. Lauren breathed through the pain. She had seen worse in federal raids and gang takedowns. She had walked through gunfire, shielded witnesses, and buried colleagues. But what struck her now was not the violence. It was the certainty, the absolute certainty, that this man believed he could do this without consequence. It revealed more about the department than any briefing packet or background file ever could. Malik kept recording, his face collected and unreadable, but his chest rising and falling with a tightness he had learned long ago to hide. He understood instantly what this footage meant. In a department already under federal investigation, where complaints disappeared, and officers whispered about missing files, this moment was the kind that lit fuses, and fuses, once lit, do not care who survives the blast. Lauren lifted her chin a fraction of an inch, letting her voice carry, "Sergeant, remove your arm. Now." She did not shout. Authority does not need volume. Something in her tone cut through the haze of McAllister's frustration. He shifted his weight. Confused for a brief moment, torn between instinct and disbelief, then a door slammed open. Judge Evelyn R. Hargreaves, small in stature but powerful in presence, stepped into the corridor. Her voice hit the air with the force of a gavel. "Ryan, stand down at once." McAllister jerked his arm back, not out of remorse but out of fear of the judge's authority. Lauren steadied herself, sliding one hand along the wall to stay upright. Her nose was bleeding steadily now, down the front of her blouse, down her wrist. The teenager stared in disbelief, whispering, "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I didn't mean." But she shook her head gently. "You did nothing wrong," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Two deputies rushed forward, placing themselves between her and McAllister. Malik tucked his camera discreetly against his chest, still recording, the lens catching every detail. The hallway felt colder now, as if everyone present understood that they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Lauren held a tissue from her pocket against her nose, the white cloth turning red almost instantly. She looked McAllister straight in the eyes, her voice lowered to a whisper meant only for him. But Malik's camera caught every word. "You just bought yourself a prison cell." It was not anger. It was fact. Spoken by someone who had spent a lifetime proving that consequences always arrive. By 8 o'clock that night, McAllister was placed on paid administrative leave. It was a reflexive decision, the department's default shield, a policy as old as the problems it tried to conceal. But inside the closed chat group of 73 officers, the video Malik recorded began to spread. Not publicly, not to command, only sideways, through whispers, through fear, through loyalty to the wrong people. Some officers watched it in silence. Some cursed under their breath. Some laughed nervously. A few deleted it immediately. No one reported it. That silence was its own confession. Lauren sat in her temporary office hours later, ice pressed to her cheek, blood cleaned from her collar. She did not shake. She did not rage. She simply opened her notebook and wrote with a steady hand, "The culture will fight back." After a long pause, she added a second line, "We fight harder." She closed the notebook, exhaled slowly, and felt the weight of what this day would become. She had walked into Portsmouth prepared to rebuild a broken institution. She had not expected the first brick thrown to be aimed at her face, but she recognized a beginning when she saw one. This was not an incident. It was ignition. Outside. The courthouse lights dimmed for the night. Inside. A new chief touched the swelling on her cheekbone, straightened her spine, and understood that the battle for this city had officially begun. The spark was lit, and the walls around it were dry. Lauren Whitfield was sworn in on Monday morning with a cotton pad pressed under her sleeve to hide the last trace of bruising along her ribs. A quiet reminder of her first week in a city that did not yet know what she intended to change. She raised her right hand, spoke the oath with calm resolve, and felt the weight of an entire department settle onto her shoulders with a gravity that exceeded ceremony. She did not need applause. She needed honesty. That afternoon, before the photographers finished packing their cameras, she made her first formal request, every citizen complaint file from the past 10 years. It was the kind of request that revealed a culture's soul. 11 torn cartons arrived on a rolling cart with a note that read, "This is all we have, E." When she opened the first box, she already knew something was wrong. Entire years were missing. Folders were empty. Signatures were erased. She counted for herself, one sheet at a time, until the truth stood in plain view. 40% of the files had vanished, not misfiled, not misplaced, gone. Her jaw tightened in a way that signaled not anger, but resolve. She called no meeting. She made no speech. She simply stacked the cartons in a row and created a silent ledger of what she would have to rebuild. By Wednesday night, the pressure in the building felt heavier. Officers walked past her with quick glances, polite but guarded, as if they knew the structure they depended on had started to crack. That same week, at 11 o'clock on a cold, quiet night, Lauren drove alone to First Baptist Church. where the lights were dim and the sanctuary held the kind of stillness reserved for truth-telling moments. Captain Nia Simone Holloway was waiting in the sixth pew with two small encrypted hard drives wrapped in a handkerchief. She slid them across the polished wood without ceremony. Her voice was steady, but her eyes carried a lifetime of frustration. 312 cases they made disappear. "Chief," she said, "I kept copies. Every one of them." Lauren held the drives the way one holds something fragile and explosive. She did not thank Nia immediately. She only nodded and asked, "Who knows you have these?" Nia answered with calm certainty. No one alive who would admit it. Lauren understood the cost of that sentence. She also understood that trust was a gift in a place that had forgotten what trust looked like. They spoke quietly for a few minutes, two women carrying a decade of silence between them. When they rose to leave, the sanctuary seemed heavier, as if the building itself understood the risk now forming inside it. While Lauren prepared for a long war, Ryan McAllister walked into the ruins of his own life. He returned home to find the locks changed and a restraining order taped to the door with his wife's signature at the bottom. It was not the injury in the hallway that ended his marriage. It was everything that came before it. The lies, the debt, the anger. He sat in his pickup truck with bottles on the floorboard and stared at the restraining order until the words blurred. He drank himself into unconsciousness under a streetlight that flickered through the night like a warning he no longer heard. When he woke hours later, he did not remember how he got there or why his face felt numb on one side. He turned the key and drove aimlessly, drifting through streets that had ceased to feel like home. Across the city, Malik Amir Carter sat at his kitchen table in silence. He had cleaned his body camera twice that night, not out of fear, but out of ritual. He believed in evidence. He believed in truth. But he also believed in consequences. Shortly before midnight, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. 3 lines, no punctuation, no emotion. "Delete the video or your mother won't wake up tomorrow." He read it twice, then a third time. He checked the lock on the front door. He walked down the hallway to make sure his mother was asleep in her room, breathing steadily, unaware of the danger her son had stepped into. He returned to the kitchen table and placed the phone beside the folded body camera. Malik had seen intimidation before. He had watched young Marines break under threats that felt personal. But this was different. This was not a battlefield. This was home. He exhaled slowly, willing his pulse to settle. He did not delete the video. He saved it to 3 separate drives instead. He whispered to himself, not as reassurance, but as a vow. No one touches her. Not for this. Not ever. By Thursday morning, Lauren noticed the shift. Officers who once offered polite smiles now walked past her without making eye contact. Some cut conversations short when she entered the room. Others lingered near doorways, silent, calculating. She felt no hostility, only fear. The kind of fear that rises when secrets begin to feel threatened. She moved through the building without raising her voice, taking note of who cooperated and who looked away. She understood that power in a broken department was measured not by rank, but by silence. And silence, she knew, often signaled guilt. That evening, she brought the 2 encrypted drives to her temporary office and worked until nearly midnight. She opened one file after another, each revealing a pattern so clear it no longer needed explanation. Beaten teenagers, unreported chokeholds, complaints marked resolved with no signatures, reports closed without interviews, notes in margins written in the same hand across 5 years. It was no longer a case of missing records. It was a system of disappearance. Lauren looked up from the screen, the room dim around her, and understood the truth. The assault in the hallway had not been an isolated act of brutality. It had been a symptom, a reflection of a culture that had grown bold through decades of protection. She pressed her fingers against her temple and whispered a single sentence into the quiet room. This is why they pushed back. It was not despair. It was recognition. Outside her office window, the city moved through its nightly rhythm, unaware of the storm rising inside its police headquarters. Inside, Lauren stacked the hard drives beside her notebook, closed her eyes for a moment, and accepted the reality of what lay ahead. She was not facing a troubled officer or a flawed sergeant. She was facing a structure built on secrecy, reinforced by silence, and defended by those with the most to lose. She opened her notebook and wrote a single line that would guide every step in the months to follow. Truth does not negotiate. She closed the cover, exhaled slowly, and reached for the first of hundreds of files that would reshape the future of the department. The silence before the storm had settled, and the storm itself was now inevitable. Lauren Whitfield created the Special Integrity Unit on a quiet Tuesday morning, without ceremony, without announcement, and without seeking permission from the people who preferred she never existed. She gathered 5 people she trusted. 5 people who had nothing in common except a belief that the truth should not remain buried. And she led them into a small basement room that smelled of old paper and slow decay. She chose the room deliberately. Work done in darkness often brought the brightest revelations. She placed 2 hard drives on the table, the same drives Nia Holloway had handed her inside First Baptist Church, and said in a calm voice, "What we uncover here may end careers. It may also save lives." No one replied. They simply nodded, because there was no need for speeches. They began with the first file, then the second, then the 50th, and soon the same pattern emerged like an old bruise rising beneath the skin. 312 citizen complaints had vanished between 2018 and the present day. They had been removed not with haste, but with care, as if someone had believed the erasure itself was an act of protection. The files that remained showed consistent signatures that did not match the officers listed. Interview dates were changed, witness names were crossed out. Children as young as 14 appeared on a hidden Google sheet titled Problem Children, a list no one admitted to creating. Lauren stared at the spreadsheet for a long moment, reading the names of boys and girls who had been flagged as threats before they were old enough to drive. Her breath grew heavy. She had seen targeted surveillance in gang units. She had seen intelligence tracking in national cases. But she had never seen a list like this, created by local officers, hidden behind encrypted folders, and updated with callous precision. She closed the sheet quietly and whispered, "God help them," without knowing whether she meant the children or the officers who had placed them there. The deeper they dug, the darker the soil became. Vincent Moretti, the aggressive fraternal order of police attorney who strutted through the department with the swagger of a man who never feared an audit, appeared in transaction after transaction. His training company, Tactical Mindset Limited Liability Company, had billed the city more than $1.9 million over several years, mostly for courses no one could verify had been taught. Lauren printed the invoices, stacked them in a neat line, and marked each one with a quiet pencil stroke. "Conflict of interest is an understatement," she said softly. Behind her, one of the analysts whispered, "This is theft with a business card." No one disagreed. And deep within the financial records, a separate thread emerged like a shadow no one wanted to acknowledge. Deputy Chief Douglas Hargrove, the man who had served 30 years, the man with the calm voice and worn lungs, received $28,000 a year in what were labeled consulting fees. The payments were routed through a shell limited liability company with no listed employees, no physical address, and no service descriptions. Lauren read the entries twice, then a third time. She closed the ledger and spoke without emotion. He was protecting the system, and the system paid him to do it. There was no triumph in her tone, only sorrow. She respected Hargrove once, or at least wanted to, but the files told the truth, and the truth cared nothing for reputation. While Lauren's team uncovered the invisible architecture of corruption, Ryan McAllister's life crumbled beyond repair. His house was foreclosed without ceremony and without mercy. The bank removed his possessions while he watched from the sidewalk. Numb and silent, he placed a duffel bag in the back seat of his old unmarked cruiser, locked the doors, and slept crumpled against the window like a man who no longer recognized his own reflection. He spent nights writing apology letters he never sent, letters to his wife, to the teenager he shoved, to the chief he assaulted, to the colleagues he betrayed, and even to himself. He tore most of them in half. Unable to reconcile the person he once believed he was with the person he had become. His alcoholism deepened, his anger sharpened, and his despair, already heavy, became a permanent weight on his chest. The Special Integrity Unit worked late into the evenings, each discovery carrying the sharp edge of betrayal. Lauren felt the strain in her body, in the deep ache behind her eyes, in the way she pressed her fingers quietly against her temple each time a new document confirmed what she already suspected. Corruption was never loud. It was quiet, deliberate, and systematic, and the silence around it was its greatest shield. She reviewed transcripts of internal interviews conducted under previous leadership. Dozens of them ended with the same phrase, "No further action recommended." It became a refrain, a lullaby for misconduct. She highlighted the phrase each time it appeared, marking the margin until the page looked like a graveyard of unacknowledged harm. At the end of the first week, the team uncovered a string of emails between senior staff and the city attorney's office discussing off-record discipline alternatives. Lauren read them slowly. These alternatives included warnings without documentation, counseling sessions with no notes, and disciplinary reductions that magically vanished after 90 days. It was corruption disguised as compassion, concealed beneath administrative language written by people who feared public exposure more than they feared moral failure. Lauren placed the emails in a binder labeled simply, "Buried Consequences." She closed the binder with a calm but decisive motion. She did not slam it. Dignity did not require force. Late Friday evening, as the team prepared to leave, Lauren gathered them around the table. She did not raise her voice. She did not lecture. She said one sentence that would define the work ahead. "We are not exposing bad officers," she said quietly. "We are exposing a system that protected them." The room fell into a thoughtful silence. Each person understood the weight of what she meant. The integrity they sought was not an ideal, it was a labor, and the labor would demand years. When the others left, Lauren remained alone in the basement room, staring at the rows of files spread across the table. She traced the edge of one folder with her fingertips, feeling the texture of the paper, the weight of the truth inside it. She whispered to herself, "Digging a grave is easier than digging out a city." It was a moment of honesty, not despair. She closed the folder, turned off the light, and walked up the stairwell into a building that had no idea how deeply she had already begun to reshape its future. In the silence of that night, she understood that the grave they were uncovering had been filled for years. But now, finally, someone was willing to open it, 3 weeks after the assault. The city moved with an uneasy rhythm, as if everyone sensed that something large and irreversible was approaching, but no one knew how close the moment truly was. Inside the Portsmouth Police Department, conversations stopped when Lauren walked past. Officers who once greeted her out of courtesy now kept their heads lowered, unsure whether loyalty should turn toward tradition or toward truth. She felt the tension without needing anyone to say it. Pressure builds quietly before it erupts, and the department was already trembling beneath its own weight. The Special Integrity Unit spent long nights in the basement, parsing years of misconduct, while upstairs the old guard whispered in doorways, exchanging rumors in short murmurs. Lauren kept her composure, never raising her voice, never revealing the exhaustion she carried home each night. She understood the stakes. The more truth she uncovered, the more desperate the system became to protect itself. It was not hatred that frightened her. It was fear. Fear can make good people silent, and silent people can become part of the harm without lifting a hand. By the third week, she sensed that the silence was reaching its peak, and then it broke, on a gray Wednesday morning. The video Malik had recorded was leaked anonymously to Wavy TV 10 and the Virginian Pilot. Neither outlet disclosed the source. The clip appeared online at 6:12 a.m. It showed 42 seconds of violence, 42 seconds of a sergeant shoving the incoming chief into a wall, 42 seconds of blood on a white blouse and a calm voice saying, "You just bought yourself a prison cell," within an hour. The video passed 1 million views. By noon, commuters watched it at red lights. By late afternoon, teachers whispered about it in school hallways. By nightfall, national anchors replayed it between election updates and overseas headlines. The footage spread not because it was shocking, but because it felt familiar. People had seen similar scenes in other cities. The difference here was who the victim was: a black woman, a mother, a federal agent, a police chief, the symbol of the institution attacked by the institution itself. It became impossible to ignore. Within 72 hours, the video reached 31 million views. Comment sections erupted. Calls for transparency flooded City Hall. Faith leaders organized prayer circles. Activists organized marches. The Justice Department expanded its pattern or practice investigation overnight. Federal attorneys flew in from Washington to assess the scope of the corruption, and reporters from major networks booked hotel rooms across the waterfront. For the first time in decades, Portsmouth found itself on the national stage not for its shipyard or its port, but for the turmoil inside its police department. Lauren watched the coverage quietly from her office, one hand pressed against her cheek as if holding herself steady. She did not wish for fame. She did not crave vindication. She only wanted truth. But the truth rarely arrives alone. It arrives with consequences, and consequences demand payment. The protests began on the night of the leak. A small group gathered outside headquarters holding candles and homemade signs. The next night, the crowd doubled. By the 6th night, the air outside the building pulsed with chants calling for accountability and reform. By the 11th night, the street was closed for safety as thousands filled the entire block. Lauren stood behind her darkened office window each evening, watching the marchers move with a unity that felt heavy with grief and hope at the same time. She whispered to herself, "They deserved better long before I arrived." She knew the department had failed too many for too long, and the people outside were not demanding perfection. They were demanding honesty. She intended to give it to them, while the city rose. Ryan McAllister fell. The whispers about him grew crueler each day. His former friends avoided him. His family refused to answer his calls. He lived alone in what remained of his life, spiraling between numbness and regret. On the 13th night after the leak, he drove to his empty garage, turned off the engine, and sat in the dark for nearly an hour. The smell of oil lingered faintly, mixed with the metallic cold of unfinished despair. He held his duty weapon in both hands, staring at the barrel as if it might speak. His breathing grew uneven, his face twisted with confusion, rage, and a sorrow so deep it had no name. Then, without ceremony, he turned the weapon toward his temple and pulled the trigger. The bullet grazed his skull, tearing through skin and bone, but not deep enough to end his life. The neighbors found him collapsed on the floor, unconscious and bleeding. He survived the attempt, But the man who awoke in the hospital days later was no longer whole. His speech was slurred. His left side was paralyzed. His memory faltered. He remained alive. But the life he returned to was not one he recognized. Hours after his suicide attempt, a 14-page letter appeared online. It was his suicide note, leaked by someone with access to the police report. Lauren read it alone in her office. The sentences were uneven. Some lines trembled with regret, others with resentment. But one sentence stood out above the rest. "I don't hate black people. I hate me." She read it twice. Then she closed the document and exhaled slowly, the weight of those words pressing against her chest. She did not excuse him. She did not condemn him. She simply understood him. Broken institutions break the people inside them long before they break the ones outside. Ryan was not innocent, but he was also not the origin of the corruption. He was a product of a system that had rewarded the worst parts of him until those parts consumed him. The days after the video leak blurred together in long, tense hours. The federal investigators held meetings with Lauren, the city manager, and the city attorney. Reporters camped outside the building. Anonymous threats escalated. Officers whispered about resignations. Others whispered about retaliation. But the public did not waver. They demanded accountability, and accountability had begun. Lauren remained composed, though each night she returned home with a deeper ache behind her ribs. The kind of ache that grows not from injury, but from responsibility. She tucked her daughter in, kissed her forehead, and reminded herself that every sacrifice was for a future where Maya could grow up in a city that respected truth more than fear. On the 17th day after the leak, Lauren met with her special integrity unit in the basement room. She looked at each of them, their tired eyes and steady hands, and said, "There is no turning back now, not for any of us." No one spoke. They did not need to. Their silence held a shared resolve that words could not improve. They continued their work, file by file, case by case, truth by truth, across the city. Families watched the news with cautious hope. Survivors of past misconduct reached out to one another with quiet recognition. Community elders gathered in small circles to talk about the meaning of justice. Children asked questions their parents struggled to answer. And while all this unfolded, the Justice Department prepared a deeper inquiry, one that would stretch through every structure of the department. Lauren understood what was coming. A reckoning not just for Ryan, not just for the officers in the missing files, but for the culture that had allowed harm to grow in silence. By the end of the third week, the air in Portsmouth felt heavy with truth, as if the entire city held its breath waiting for the next chapter. Lauren stood in her office late one evening, looking out at the protesters gathered beneath the streetlights. She whispered, almost prayerfully, "Let this pain become purpose." She placed her palm against the cool glass, watching the candlelight flicker against the crowd. She knew that justice was slow. She knew that healing was slower. But the breaking point had arrived. The system had been forced open, and now, in the raw light of national scrutiny, nothing could return to what it once was. The storm had reached its peak. The consequences were beginning, and the city, wounded but awake, was preparing for the reckoning to come. The 5-day public disciplinary hearing at the Portsmouth Pavilion began under a gray morning sky, but the atmosphere inside the vast hall felt sharper than any weather could explain. It was the first time in the city's history that a police disciplinary proceeding was held in a public venue large enough to host concerts. Rows of chairs filled with citizens, clergy, teachers, retirees, and families who had carried the weight of years of unanswered harm. Cameras from local and national outlets lined the back wall. The moment was larger than any single case. It was a public confrontation with the truth. Lauren Whitfield sat in the front row, posture straight, hands folded, every breath controlled, though the pressure around her chest felt as tight as a vice. She did not watch the cameras or the crowd. She watched the stage, the elevated platform where the department would finally be forced to speak under oath. When Judge Evelyn R. Hargreaves entered the room, the noise settled instantly. Her presence commanded attention, not through grandeur but through the quiet authority of someone who had spent a lifetime upholding the weight of justice. She opened the hearing with a simple statement. This city deserves the truth, no matter the cost, over the next 5 days. That truth flowed from voices long silenced. The original witness list contained 3 names, but when the hearing opened for public testimony, 41 citizens stepped forward instead. They spoke in steady voices, broken voices, trembling voices, but all carried the same resonance. Mothers described children handcuffed without cause. Fathers recalled nights when their sons were stopped 5 times in a single month. A teenager recounted being thrown against a patrol car with no explanation. An elderly man described officers entering his home after mistaking his address, then laughing as they left without apology. Lauren listened to each story with a stillness that bordered on reverence. These were not statistics. These were lives. Each story added a layer to the reckoning the city had spent years avoiding. Reporters scribbled non-stop. Officers in the back shifted uncomfortably. But the most striking emotion came from the people testifying. They were not eager for revenge. They were hungry for acknowledgement. And acknowledgement, once given, becomes impossible to withdraw. On the 3rd day, Deputy Chief Douglas Hargrove appeared. He arrived in a wheelchair, pushed by a medical aide. His portable oxygen tank hissed softly with each breath. His body was thin, his skin pale, and his cheeks hollowed from months of chemotherapy that no longer slowed the cancer spreading through his lungs. He looked older than his 51 years, as if the burden of what he carried had accelerated time. When he reached the microphone, the room fell silent. Even those who despised him understood the gravity of seeing a man who once commanded a building now struggling to lift his hands. His voice rasped with weakness, but the words were steady. "I failed this department," he said. "I chose the brotherhood over justice. I did not stop what I should have stopped. I protected people who did not deserve protection." He paused for breath, chest rising with effort. "And I harmed good officers by shielding bad ones. I was wrong." The room did not erupt. It did not applaud. It absorbed his confession like a stone dropped into deep water. Lauren felt the heaviness of the moment settle against her ribs. She had waited for accountability, but hearing it spoken aloud by the man who built the system made the truth feel sharper, more painful, and more necessary. On the 4th day, Vincent Moretti took the stand. He arrived with his usual confidence, tailored suit, perfect posture, and the air of a man who believed he could talk his way out of anything. But the documents were stacked against him. Contracts, emails, invoices, and testimony that painted a clear picture of conflict of interest and broken ethics. He attempted to charm, deflect, and minimize. He spoke about standard practices, common arrangements, and mutual professional respect. But Judge Hargreaves cut through his language with precise questions. "Did you profit personally from training officers you later defended in misconduct cases?" He hesitated. "Did you report these dual relationships to the city?" He shifted in his chair. "Were your companies paid for training sessions that no officer remembers attending?" His throat tightened. One by one, the walls he relied upon crumbled under the weight of facts. By the end of the afternoon, the bar's disciplinary review board announced the suspension of his law license for 3 years pending further investigation. He walked off the stage with stiff steps, his expression hollow, his confidence cracked. The audience did not cheer. They did not jeer. They simply watched him leave. understanding that corruption often hides behind polished shoes and professional smiles. The final day belonged to Ryan McAllister. He entered the pavilion in a wheelchair, pushed by two deputies. Half his face drooped from the self-inflicted bullet wound. His left arm hung motionless across his lap. His speech had softened into a heavy slur that made each word sound fragile. He wore no uniform, only a plain gray jumpsuit. The crowd shifted uncomfortably as he was wheeled to the testimony table. Some pitied him, some despised him. Most felt both at once. Lauren watched him without anger, without pity, but with the sober understanding that he represented both an individual tragedy and a systemic failure. When he spoke, his voice cracked like broken glass. "I am guilty," he said, "not just of what I did to Chief Whitfield, but of years, of anger I never controlled." The room held its breath. He swallowed slowly. "I thought I was strong, but I was weak, and I hurt people because of it." His eyes drifted toward Lauren. "I am sorry." The words hung in the air, neither absolving nor condemning, merely existing as fragments of a shattered man's attempt at truth. Judge Hargreaves read the findings in a tone that allowed no misunderstanding. Ryan McAllister was sentenced to 4 years and 9 months in federal prison for aggravated assault and civil rights violation. The deputies positioned themselves behind his chair as she spoke. When the gavel fell, an almost sacred silence filled the pavilion. McAllister closed his eyes, his breath unsteady, as the deputies turned his wheelchair toward the exit. He looked at Lauren one last time, his voice rasped with effort. "Sorry, but you'll never fix this place." It was not a threat. It was a resignation, a belief shaped by decades of culture, spoken by a man who no longer believed redemption was possible for anyone, including himself. Lauren did not look away. She held his gaze with calm resolve, her expression steady, carrying neither anger nor surrender. When he disappeared behind the curtains, she felt the room exhale as if a long-held breath had finally been released. The hearing ended not with applause, but with a collective understanding that the city had reached a turning point. Truth had been spoken publicly. Accountability had begun. But reckoning is not the end of a story. It is the moment a story refuses to remain buried. Lauren walked slowly through the pavilion doors into the soft evening air, her body heavy with exhaustion and her mind heavy with responsibility. She knew the hardest work still lay ahead. The system had been exposed, but exposure alone would not heal the wounds, she whispered to herself. "We begin again tomorrow." And deep in her chest, a quiet determination settled like a heartbeat, steady, unbroken, and ready for whatever the next chapter demanded. The reckoning ended on a Friday, but the cost began that same night. Slow at first, then rising like a tide that swallowed every corner of Lauren Whitfield's life. The moment the pavilion lights dimmed, the threats arrived. At first they came as emails written in jagged bursts of anger, each one accusing her of destroying the department, destroying tradition, destroying good men. By the second day, the messages grew darker. Some included photographs of her house, some named her daughter. One message read only, 2 bullets, one for you, one for her. Lauren showed none of this to Maya. She saved the messages in a locked folder and handed copies to federal investigators, who increased surveillance around her home. But no amount of security erased the fear that began to settle in her body like a second heartbeat. She slept lightly, waking at each noise outside the window, listening for footsteps, for engines, for anything that sounded like danger drawing near. She understood that leadership carried a price, but she had never imagined that the price would be paid by a 16-year-old girl who only wanted to finish her school year in peace. As the threats grew, the bullying at Maya's school grew even faster. Some students whispered that her mother was a traitor. Others mocked her for the video that had made its way across social media. Maya tried to stay brave, but one afternoon she returned home with her shoulders shaking, unable to speak through her tears. Lauren held her daughter as she sobbed, feeling her own chest break open in a way that no courtroom attack had ever done. 2 days later, she made the decision she had been dreading. She withdrew Maya from school and moved her into a therapeutic program 2 hours away, one designed for teens coping with trauma, when she dropped her off. Maya clung to her with a quiet desperation. Lauren whispered, "You will be safe. That is all that matters." She drove away with her vision blurred, knowing she had done the right thing and knowing it would never feel right. At the same time, the cost reached Nia Holloway's home in a different but equally violent way, 3 weeks after her testimony. At 3 o'clock in the morning, a burst of gunfire shattered the calm of her living room. 3 bullets ripped through the window, lodging in the opposite wall just above the picture frame that held her daughter's graduation photo. Nia pulled her family to the floor while her husband called the police, though she already knew calling would bring no comfort. The responding officers took statements with stiff detachment, careful not to reveal their thoughts, careful not to show emotion in a department at war with itself. By sunrise, Nia decided that staying would only tempt fate. That afternoon, she packed her family into their SUV and drove to Charlotte, where her mother waited with a guest room, warm meals, and the kind of safety Portsmouth could no longer guarantee. When Lauren called her that night, Nia answered in a soft, tired voice. "We are safe," she said, "but we cannot come back. Not yet." Lauren closed her eyes, feeling the guilt settle like weight pressing on her spine. She whispered, "You did the right thing." Though the truth hurt deeply, leadership meant losing people she trusted, and she had already lost too many. In another corner of the city, Malik Amir Carter faced a different kind of exile. After the video leaked, officers who once shared coffee with him stopped meeting his eyes. Conversations fell silent when he entered a room. Some colleagues moved to the other side of the hallway. Others whispered that he had betrayed the Brotherhood. One morning, he found a note taped to his locker that read, "Traitors don't belong here." When he opened the door, the contents of his locker had been dumped on the floor, crushed and trampled. Malik stood still for a long moment, realizing that the department he had served with loyalty had now turned its back on him. By the end of the month, he resigned. There was no ceremony, no farewell gathering, no handshake from command staff. He walked out of the building with a cardboard box in his hands and a hollow ache in his chest. Within weeks, he founded a private security firm focused on protecting schools, a role that allowed him to serve without the weight of a badge that no longer represented honor. He told no one about the threats he continued to receive. He simply worked, protected, and rebuilt his life in quiet determination. Meanwhile, the cost consumed the last days of Deputy Chief Douglas Hargrove. The cancer that had carved through his lungs showed no mercy. 6 months after the hearing, he died in a hospital bed overlooking a city he had spent decades shaping, sometimes with good intentions, sometimes with devastating consequences. Only 9 people attended his funeral. None wore uniforms. His legacy was complicated, a blend of loyalty and failure, of protection and betrayal, and the city did not quite know how to mourn him. Lauren did not attend the funeral, not out of anger but out of respect for the family's privacy. She sent flowers, simple white lilies with a note that read, "For the truth you spoke, even when it was late." She hoped his family understood the intention behind the gesture, though she knew intentions often fall short of healing. As months passed, the financial cost of the department's collapse revealed itself with painful clarity. Settlements for past misconduct, newly discovered cases, and long-ignored complaints rose to $29 million across 24 months. The city had no choice but to raise property taxes by 4%, a move that sparked frustration and public debate. Some residents blamed Lauren, others blamed the officers, but most understood the deeper truth. The cost had not been created by reform. The cost had been created by decades of resistance to reform. Accountability was not expensive, cover-ups were, and the bill had finally come due. Lauren aged 10 years in 18 months. The lines along her forehead deepened. Her shoulders carried a constant stiffness. Her voice grew quieter, not from weakness, but from the weight of everything she refused to abandon. She worked long evenings in her office, studying federal reports, meeting with community leaders, reviewing disciplinary records, and preparing for the consent decree she knew was coming. She missed dinners with Maya. She missed quiet evenings in her living room. She missed the version of herself that once believed reform could be achieved without breaking the hearts of the people she loved. But each morning, she woke with the same steady determination. She brushed her hair, straightened her jacket, and walked back into a building that felt both hostile and hopeful at the same time. The cost was brutal. It carved into families, friendships, reputations, and entire neighborhoods. But hidden beneath the loss was something fragile and unmistakable. A shift, a small one, a painful one, but a shift nonetheless. The city was changing, the department was changing, and Lauren, despite the bruises across her spirit, refused to let the cost stop the progress. She stood in the center of the storm, steady, tired, and unbroken, knowing that the highest price was often the price paid by those who dared to walk first. The federal consent decree arrived on a quiet Thursday morning, delivered not with fanfare, but with the solemn weight of a document that reshapes an entire city's future. Lauren Whitfield read every page slowly, her fingers tracing the lines that mandated new training standards, new reporting systems, new oversight structures, and years of federal monitors stationed inside the building she now led. It was not a victory. It was accountability, the kind that comes only after decades of harm. As the federal team moved through the department, officers stiffened under their scrutiny, unsure how to navigate a world where silence no longer protected them, but the numbers spoke for themselves. Within months, use of force incidents fell by 54%. The data offered no speeches, no celebration, just a steady acknowledgement that the culture had begun to change. Community trust, once a ruin at 17%, climbed to 43%, still painfully low, still fragile, but for the first time in years, the line was moving upward instead of down. Lauren kept those numbers on a single sheet of paper inside her desk drawer. Not as proof of success, but as a reminder that progress grows slowly and often through pain. She worked long nights under the thin hum of fluorescent lights, reading report after report with eyes that carried both exhaustion and resolve. Some days she felt like she was holding the city together with nothing more than willpower. Other days, she sensed something stronger, hope rising in small, quiet places. One Friday at 2:14 in the morning, after a meeting that stretched far past midnight, Lauren returned to her office to gather her notes before going home. The hallway was dark. Her footsteps were slow, softened by fatigue. When she opened her office door, she noticed an envelope on the floor, slid gently under the threshold. There was no name written on it, no handwriting on the outside, only a slight bend at one corner, as if someone had hesitated before placing it there. She picked it up, opened the flap, and unfolded a piece of lined paper torn from a notebook. The handwriting inside was uneven, rushed, but filled with sincerity. My 12-year-old son waved at a patrol car today for the first time in 8 years instead of running. Thank you. Please don't quit. There was no signature, No address, no date, just those words, written with the kind of simplicity that carries more power than any headline. Lauren sat down on the cold office floor, the letter trembling slightly in her hands. She felt a warmth rise in her chest, unfamiliar and overwhelming. Tears filled her eyes, soft and quiet. Breaking through the walls she had held up for 22 months, she let herself cry, not from pain, not from fear, but from recognition. Recognition that all the sacrifice, all the threats, all the long nights and broken relationships and lonely decisions had begun to mean something. A child had felt safe enough to wave. That was the beginning of a world worth fighting for. When the tears finally slowed, Lauren pulled out her phone and typed a message to Nia Holloway in Charlotte. "Tomorrow we go back to work. There are still kids who haven't waved yet." She sent it and waited. The reply came quickly, a single line that carried the strength of a soldier returning to her post. "I'm still in the fight." Lauren held the phone against her chest for a moment, feeling the quiet solidarity of a friend who had lost her home but not her courage. Their work was not finished. It had barely begun. She stood slowly, placed the anonymous letter inside her notebook, and turned her desk lamp back on. The light revealed stacks of reports, federal findings, misconduct files, and policy drafts that needed revision before morning. She touched the spine of each folder with the tenderness of someone tending wounds rather than paperwork. This was no longer a job. It was a responsibility carried in her bones. Outside her window, the city slept under a thin veil of streetlights. Portsmouth was still fractured, still healing, still learning to trust. The work ahead was heavier than the work behind. But somewhere in that sleeping city, a child had waved, and somewhere else, another might wave tomorrow. The thought steadied her. She opened the next report, her eyes scanning lines of text that documented yet another area the department must reform. The work was endless, but it was also necessary. She felt the fatigue tighten across her shoulders, but reminded herself that the measure of leadership is not how quickly change arrives, but how faithfully a leader stands when change costs them everything. The building was silent, except for the faint buzz of wiring behind the walls. Lauren breathed slowly, letting the quiet settle around her like a thin blanket. She thought of Maya, safe in her therapeutic school 2 hours away, learning to rebuild her sense of safety one day at a time. She thought of Malik, rebuilding his life with purpose in a new world he had been forced to create. She thought of Naya, miles away, but still holding the truth like a torch she refused to drop. She thought of Doug Hargrove, who had spoken the truth only when his body was too tired to hold anything back. And she thought of Ryan McAllister, broken by his own choices, serving his sentence in federal prison with half his body refusing to obey him. Every person had paid a price, some justly, some unjustly. But in the end, the city itself bore the largest weight, struggling to lift its head toward a future better than the past. Lauren felt a deep breath rise in her chest and release slowly. She turned another page of the Department of Justice report, tracing the lines that described the next steps, the next expectations, the next obligations. She whispered to herself, "We are not done." The words settled in the air with quiet determination. Reform was not a destination. It was a posture, a commitment, a willingness to stand in the longest night until the faintest dawn appeared. She kept reading, her eyes steady, her resolve unbroken. It would take years. It would take strength. It would take sacrifice. But the city was no longer asleep, and neither was she. In that late, silent hour, surrounded by reports and memories and the fragile beginnings of change, Chief Lauren Alexandria Whitfield remained awake, not because she had to be, but because somewhere in Portsmouth, A child had waved. And for the first time in decades, someone inside the department was still awake, fighting for a future where every child could do the same. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please subscribe, leave a like, and share it with someone who cares about justice and truth.